Could Mark Vientos break camp with the big league club and make the opening day roster for the Mets this season? I'm going to preview what lies ahead for the Mets' top prospect in 2023 on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment matter more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Mark Vientos is a prospect that we spent a lot of time on last season, and we've talked about a bunch this offseason as well. As we are gearing up for opening day, I will be breaking down every single player and top prospect that could figure into the equation this year by looking at their projections on FanGraphs and trying to decide what can we expect from them in this upcoming season. For Mark Vientos, it's pretty interesting to look at the projection models because they basically are saying he's not going to be on the Mets this year. He's not going to have a role. If you look at all the projections that actually factor in the depth chart, you got 2 games projected by 3 of them, 15 games projected by the other 3 of them, basically saying he's going to have about the same role as he had last year, a cameo at some point, but no significant contribution to the big league club. The only projection model we can look at is ZiPS that does not focus in on the depth chart. That's just basically looking at, all right, if Mark Vientos got some run this season and played 107 games and got 436 plate appearances, what would his year look like? They have him with a walk rate of 8.5%, a strikeout rate of 32.6%, a 228 hitter, 298 on base, a 421 slug. They have his weighted runs created plus, which measures hitters based on a league average of 100, at 107, so an above average hitter, which is important to note. They have him hit 19 home runs, 52 runs scored, 61 RBIs. So still a run producer at 1.9 F4. Shockingly enough, the ZiPS projection has him grading out as a positive defender. Now, I think that's probably at first base, and that's how you would maybe get to that number, but it is a little bit surprising when this is a guy where everyone has really said the glove is the issue, that they would actually think that he could grade out favorably there. Again, the only way that makes sense to me is that they're taking his numbers at first base in AAA in a small sample size and projecting that out. But I look at Mark Vientos as a hitter, and it just depends on role as to the type of player he can be at the big league level. I really think that if we just strictly look at bat between Vientos, Alvarez, and Beatty, there's not the biggest of gaps here when it comes to offensive ceiling. Mark Vientos' bat is not in a completely different league as these guys in a bad way or a good way. He's in a very similar conversation. I think Brett Beatty has the highest floor of the Mets' top 3 prospects when it comes to their proximity to the big league level. I think Alvarez has the highest ceiling, but Vientos falls somewhere in between in both respects. For one, he is the guy that's the furthest along when it comes to his minor league development. He has been a step ahead of them until Brett Beatty leapfrogged him to get that promotion last year when Guillorme went down, and they wanted that more natural platoon fit with Escobar, and they thought that Beatty was the better fit defensively at third base. That has not changed when it comes to the defense. But let's look at the bat for Mark Vientos. 2021, he makes the jump from low A to double A. An aggressive promotion by the Mets. He struggled to start the season, but then eventually figured it out. Played 72 games at the double A level. Hit 22 home runs in 72 games. That's where we say, hey, if you played a full season, 40 home run pop, that was the first example of that in half of a season to put up 22 homers. He hit 281, 346 on base, a 580 slugging. His WRC plus was 144. He gets called up for 11 games in AAA, fares very well, walked at a 16% clip, hit 278, got on base at a 395 clip, 583 slug, a 159 WRC plus. He hit 25 home runs altogether in that season. Last year, once again, 25 home runs. He spent 101 games in AAA Syracuse. Again, did not get off to the best of starts, eventually figured it out. Finished the year in AAA hitting 280 with a 358 on base and a 519 slugging with a 129 WRC plus. He walked 10.3% of the time. He struck out 28.6% of the time. 24 homers there, 1 at the big league level, 72 RBIs. Does not steal bases, so that's not part of his game. But the bat should carry. Now, the thing is, he did get his opportunity with the Mets. 41 plate appearances, did not fare well. He hit 167, 268 on base, 278 slugging. Only had the 1 home run and 3 RBIs. Was 35% worse than your league average hitter based on WRC plus. But he did not get nearly enough run. And by the end of his stint, I felt like he was starting to give some competitive at-bats. What he can bring to the table, and what we'll be discussing more in the next segment here, is the ability to hit left-handed pitching. His OPS against left-handed pitching was well over 1,000. But when we try to look at his, promise, his potential as a prospect, you think, could he be the full-time DH on this team? Could he have more upside than Daniel Vogelbach as a complete DH and be able to come in at some point and grab that job this year? I don't think it's completely out of the question. I look at Mark Vientos' profile as a hitter, as a guy that is still figuring things out at 23 years old, that has, again, if everything broke right and he had requisite playing time, he has 40 home run power. You don't say that about a lot of prospects. So I still believe in that, and if nothing else, 30 home run pop, again, over a full sample. So I go back to the projections. Do I think he's going to hit better than 228? I think he could. Look at his minor league numbers. He was a 280 hitter. Would it be that surprising if instead he was a 250 hitter, as opposed to what the projection models are saying? And if he's a 250 hitter and you're adding, 20 points to that projection on the OBP, suddenly if he's a 320 on base guy, a 250 hitter, he's walking instead of maybe the 8.5% clip they're saying. In the minors, last couple of stops, he has been at least that, if not over 10%. So if he walks a little bit more, if he can hit for a little more pop, that slug could get over 450. And suddenly, if he's a 320 OBP, 450 slug guy, you're looking at a 770 OPS. That's a pretty solid player that the Mets could call on. I think this year he's in this weird spot, and that's why a lot of these projection models have him with very limited playing time. But I also think that with a big spring training, Mark Vientos can force his way onto this roster, and that's what I discuss next. What else is around him? Who is he competing with as he tries to go in? And using his own words, he says he's ready to play every day at the big league level right now. It's going to be tough to get that type of a job, but could he find a role in this team come opening day? I think he certainly could, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We are past the midway point in the NBA season. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, and it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, the three-pointers drain. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. I have my eye on the MLB futures already, and I'm looking towards Francisco Lindor plus 2,500 to win the MVP. I think those odds are right where you want them to be to sprinkle a little bit of action. So if Lindor has a career year, you get to benefit. Don't miss your chance, though, to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. to learn more. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Early stories out of spring training. With Mark Vientos, we're hearing that he worked really hard on his agility, his speed, trying to be able to play multiple positions. He brought 3 gloves to camp. He's willing to play left field, third base, first base. He wants to do everything possible to make this team. News out of camp when it comes to Darin Ruf. He has arthritis in his wrist, and it was really hard on him to get traded midseason last year. Which side of the equation there do you find more promise? It's really tough to look at that and say, yeah, Darin Ruf is definitely going to be the answer. We look at the projection models for Ruf. They do have him playing a little bit. For the depth chart ones, you're looking at either 31 games or 50 games, and the average between 221 to 224, the on base between 314, 323, the slug between 372 and 400, WRC plus between 100 and 111, between 4 and 6 home runs, really. If you look at the Zips model, that has him getting the playing time similar to what we were discussing with Mark Vientos. That's 108 games played, 319 plate appearances, a 222 average, 323 on base, 400 slug, 111 WRC plus, and 12 home runs. Darin Ruf in 2021 hit 16 homers over 312 plate appearances. That would be, I'm thinking, it looks like that was a career high. Had 14 home runs early in his career with the Phillies at one point. But the projection models are favoring Vientos in the home run category, which is nice when you're thinking about a right-handed complement to Daniel Vogelbach at DH. And really, if we're looking at the competition that Mark Vientos has, obviously Darin Ruf is the first one that comes to mind. This is a Mets team that is pretty full when you look at the position players. Assuming no injuries, which is a massive assumption, let's knock on some wood on that. You got Marte, Canna, Nimmo, that's 3. You got Lindor, Escobar, McNeil, Alonso, that's 7. You got your 2 catchers, Narvaez, Nido. You got Guillorme. That brings us to 10. Vogelbach, Pham. All right, we're at 12 out of 13 potential position players that'll make the team. That's why we've been saying there's one spot open, and that competition is pretty big. This week, we discussed the minor league free agents, the non-roster invites that came to camp. So Vientos is competing with the likes of Tim LaCastro, who would be a speedster type, Jose Peraza, who's really just Guillorme depth, DJ Stewart, who maybe could make the team. There's a little bit of promise in that back compared to the other minor league signings, but not a ton. And Abraham Almonte, those guys would maybe give you some outfield depth, whether it be LaCastro, Stewart, or Almonte. Peraza's infield depth. And other than that, there's really nothing much to speak of. I believe that this competition ultimately comes down to 3 players: Brett Baty, Mark Vientos, and Darin Ruf. But early reports out of camp are the Mets want to put Brett Baty back in AAA, really have him work on his defense more, make him earn that promotion back up where he could then supplant Eduardo Escobar potentially and be the starting third baseman of the New York Mets. Mark Vientos, I don't think, is competing for that job. I think the Mets are perfectly happy going into opening day with Eduardo Escobar and Louis Guillorme representing their depth at third base. I will also mention Danny Mendick, if available come opening day, and according to himself in his interview with Matthew Brownstein of Metsmerized that I've referenced a few times, he is believing that he will be healthy by then. So that's another guy that is competing who, is a right-handed bat that hit very well against lefties last year. He could potentially grab that last bench spot and brings more versatility as a guy that can play some third, some short, some second, probably first base if they really wanted him to, and can play the corners in the outfield. So that is something that a Vientos will have to combat with, a player like Mendick who has some big league experience and might be able to grab a job. And then you still have the Darin Ruf of it all. Ruf having a guaranteed contract here, the $3 million. Will the Mets eat it? Will the Mets try to trade it? If Ruf looks good in camp, is that a sign that they're going to keep him? Is that a sign they're going to try to move him? Or are they going to just attempt to pass him through waivers, try to DFA him and see what happens? I really don't know where things are going to end up with Darin Ruf. We got to see what he looks like, and I think he's going to get a ton of run in these spring training games to try to prove himself. I think Mark Vientos is going to get a lot of run as well. Pete Alonso will be playing in the World Baseball Classic. Those two guys are likely to oscillate between starting at first base. Vogelbach might get some starts there as well. And then, I think for both Vientos and Ruf, they're going to throw them out in left field and see what happens, see if they can play the position to bring that to the table as well. When it comes to the defensive side of things, Darin Ruf was -7 defensive runs saved in limited playing time last year in left field. He was -4 outs above average. At first base, he was -5 defensive runs saved, 0 outs above average. It's not the greatest defender that Vientos is going up against. Now, everything I've heard about Vientos is he has looked lost in left field when he played there in the minors, and he does not look good at third base. He had a sub-900 fielding percentage at third base in 2021, which is hard to do. In 2022, it was still pretty bad at 922. We don't have as many metrics that are widely available on the defense in the minor leagues, so it's hard for me to get a great gauge of it, but everything I have seen and everything I've heard is that third base, left field, not a good spot for him. He will be a first baseman at the big league level if he ever does have a position. But in 27 games there, a 987 fielding percentage, so he was not making a ton of errors over there when he did play first base in Syracuse. Can he be passable enough at first base, third base, and left field to bring enough versatility to that bench that also is added into what he does against left-handed pitching so that he can make the roster? I think that's what he has to prove in camp. And if he does that, he just might make the team. I want to discuss if I think he's going to do that and what he could bring to this Mets team come opening day in just a second. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by Built Bars. If you're trying to lose some weight, trying to get in shape, you got to try Built Bars because this is a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, comes covered in 100% real chocolate. They have unbelievable flavors like the churro, the peanut butter brownie, the coconut almond, just to name a few. And they come with only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. The best part, you don't need to wait around for a box anymore. Now, you still can go to Built.com. That's the where I like to go a lot of times so I can get a mixed box and get multiple different flavors sent to me. But if you are out at a Walmart or a Sam's Club, you can now go to your local store to find Built Bar. That's right. Head to Walmart today, go to the pharmacy section, pick up a 4-bar box of their cookies and cream, the double chocolate, or the coconut puffs. Or if you're close to a Sam's Club, run in, grab a 13-bar box of their hit flavors, the brownie batter and the churro. You can thank me later. Go to your local store and buy Built Bars today. Should Mark Vientos break camp with the New York Mets this year? I actually, the more I think about it, believe that this might be the best answer for this roster. Last year against left-handed pitching, Vientos hit .330 with a .408 on base, a .732 slugging percentage. 13 of his 24 home runs came against left-handed pitching. His OPS against lefties was 1,140. He was unbelievable going up against southpaws. Now, when you look at what he struggled against last year, it was breaking balls. He was great against fastballs, good against changeups, and the breaking balls got him. And then we saw him get exposed with that at the big league level. Has he tightened that up? And really, when he's facing a lefty, that's not something you have to worry about as much, because if they do throw a breaking ball, either it's something you can identify and it's going to come in on your hands a little bit, and maybe you lay off of it. It could also fall right into your bat path if it is a pitch that hangs over and gets part of the plate. It's very tough for a lefty to get a guy like Vientos out. A lot of times maybe they're going to try to elevate some heat against him, and he is amazing against fastballs. So for Mark Vientos, I think if the role is you're complimenting Vogelbach, you are, in big spots, late in games, getting that at bat against a left-handed reliever, and if he's, grabbing a start from Pete at first base throughout the week, there is a path for him to get maybe 2 starts a week with a couple pinch hit appearances. And as much as you say, that's going to stun his development, where are we at with Mark Vientos as a prospect? Last deadline, I guarantee you Mark Vientos was shopped heavily at the deadline. I think we're in this, period where the New York Mets are going to really struggle to find partners in trades. I think there's teams that don't like what Steve Cohen's doing, and the last thing they want to do is give him a favorable trade, let Steve Cohen's Mets win a trade against them on top of how he's going to continue to beat everyone in free agency. So I don't know how many teams are looking at Mark Vientos and saying that's the piece that we are going to trade for as the headliner for the Mets to get that guy at the deadline to go over the top. So if you aren't really able to bolster a trade value, then it's just a matter of, do you want him to play every day in the minors? And in some respects, for his own development, maybe that's better than playing on a big league bench. But at the same time, what role are you getting him ready for? If Brett Baty is the third baseman of the future, or if you have your eyes toward Manny Machado next offseason, he's not going to be your third baseman. If you believe that you're keeping Pete Alonso, and regardless of his free agent status, he's a guy that's a franchise player that you want to keep around, and with the makeup that he has, the person that he is, the way that he has represented himself for this franchise, I'd imagine that's the case. There's no clear role there. The only place where there is a role is at DH, and in today's game, as far as an everyday DH, it really is something where you want that player to have some extra components to their game, and playing off a bench right now, having a specialized role against left-handed pitching might not be the worst thing for him. Getting an opportunity to be with the big league club, to continue to learn and to maximize the opportunities that he gets, that might be the best path to growth for Mark Vientos. And I just am betting on the 23-year-old Vientos instead of Darin Ruf, who is, he was 36 last year. He turned 37. He turns 37 in July. So I'm betting on, freshly 23-year-old Mark Vientos instead of Ruf to have an impact on the Mets bench. If you are, championship or bust, if you are looking to win this division, you got to put the best 26-man roster out there. And if we're looking at the different players who could fill that last spot on the bench, I think you would be stunting Brett Baty's development if you put him on the opening day roster, unless you are willing to concede that Escobar's not your starting third baseman. And I think they want to give Escobar an opportunity at the start of the year to prove he can still be that guy. I think they want Brett Baty to improve defensively. For Baty, an assignment to AAA makes more sense, even though I think he's the best prospect that can have the biggest impact on the team this year. Mark Vientos is in a position where I think, why not put him on the roster and see what he can do, because he's combustible in a way with that home run pop that suddenly, maybe you start off the season and a Vogelbach's not hitting, or you're getting nothing from Tommy Pham, and you're just trying to find someone who can give you some juice in that DH spot. And Mark Vientos gets on a little bit of a heater, and he's, you have a series where you face off against two lefties and he homers in back-to-back games, and suddenly you're putting him out there against a righty or two, and then those extra base hits keep on flowing. He has a good approach. He's drawing his walks, and then maybe you find something that you didn't even realize you had in Vientos. The ceiling is just so much higher for Mark Vientos than any of these other guys we're discussing. I can get my head around Danny Mendick being a more valuable bench piece with his versatility, with the base running, and his ability to maybe hit left-handed pitching. I think that's the one guy I look at where I say, all right, if he makes the team, I'm okay. I really don't get going to Darin Ruf unless he just shows you in camp that he's clearly the guy. If Darin Ruf has an amazing spring training and Mark Vientos hits a $175, well, obviously he's not going to break camp. But if Mark Vientos is primed off of a great winter of work where he is fired up and ready to make this team, and he goes out and he has a Pete Alonso 2019 spring training where he's getting a lot of playing time and he's hitting the cover off the ball, sign me up for Mark Vientos grabbing that last bench spot, and let's just see what the kid does this year. Because honestly, when it comes to his development, when it comes to his trade value, I think you're getting to a point where there's a lot more to gain than there is to lose by giving him MLB opportunities. And it really, to me, is just a shame that they wasted so much time on J.D. Davis last year when they could have given Vientos some run in the season last year before the deadline, seen what they had, and maybe be better prepared for what his role could be this time around, or know that maybe he's not an answer. They don't have those answers because of how they managed them last year. And I think the only way to figure it out is to throw him into the fire. And I actually do believe that he will be ready for that type of an opportunity. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby. Locked On MLB Prospects is where you want to go to learn about the stars of tomorrow. You can follow Locked On MLB Prospects on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.